Thank you, Eli. Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us today as we're going to be in conversation with Dr. Karen Freberg, talking about peer feedback and peer-to-peer learning from her experiences using Kritik, which is an AI-driven peer assessment platform. Just to give a quick introduction of Dr. Karen Freberg, she is the Strategic Communications Professor at the University of Louisville and also covers integrated marketing communications at West Virginia University. She's also been extremely active in the social media professors circle and has actually created a social media professors community a few years ago, which now has over 2,000 social media professors and professionals. Welcome, Dr. Freberg, and it's a pleasure having you with us today.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Just a quick introduction of the folks from Kritik as well. My name is Rohan Thomas. I'm a senior account executive here working to match up professors and their pedagogical approaches to peer assessment, peer evaluations using Kritik. We also do have Eli Samarasinghe, who's the lead instructional designer here at Kritik, who will be in conversation with Dr. Freberg shortly. Just to set a quick agenda on what we're going to be covering today, a quick brief look at the benefits of peer assessment, followed by a quick look at how Kritik is driving AI-driven peer assessments, following which we'll take a look at some learning activities that we'll be showcasing, especially with scaffolding of projects through Kritik and best practices. The most awaited part will be Dr. Freberg's panel discussion with Eli later on. And of course, we'd love to hear from you. So please do send in your questions on the chat. We have received some of them already and we'll be covering them, but we'll be keeping a sizable chunk of this session to address your questions. So feel free to use the chat in Zoom for sending your questions through. All right, quick look at the benefits of peer assessment, which has been researched extensively by faculty and researchers across North America, as well as from the work we've been doing here at Kritik. Some of the main benefits that we have been seeing is number one, decreasing the grade turnaround time and grading burden on faculty members and TAs. Of course, as the instructor, you would want to spend more time with actual teaching and coaching and mentoring your students. And using peer assessments has been found to be an effective way to reduce that grading burden. Instructors do have more time to mentor students and direct them in the right direction as the semesters progress. It does help increase material comprehension and engagement through repetition of those activities, taking a look at how their peers are doing the same activities and different approaches, which also increases the opportunity for practical application of course materials through different types of assignments, whether they be case-based work, problem-based work, teach me something self-explanatory videos, etc. Definitely something that peer assessment could help with, along with, of course, providing new opportunities for transferable skill development in terms of giving, getting, and receiving feedback is something that, as we all know, is a necessary skill set, not just in academia, also in professional and personal lives. And this is a nice little way to equip your students to deal with that. Some of the key features on Kritik outside of the regular anonymity, etc. We do have a very neat, efficient way to run group-based work, teaming up your class into groups of 3 or 4 to either run intergroup activities where groups evaluate each other's work, or within a group as well to assess contributions of group members to a final output. Kritik is a calibrated peer review platform. Calibration basically means we match the students' grading powers to the instructors, and the closer a match they are to you as the instructor, the higher the weightage their grades get to the final scores. Spotlight feature as well for faculty members that find certain creations or submissions that are of extremely high quality and they'd like their entire class to learn from that. We do have a little spotlight feature which allows you to highlight that little piece of content for easy reference for your students over the course of the semester in the platform, so they could use that for brushing up before the next assignment or tests, midterms, etc. We're going to take a quick look at the Kritik platform right now. 3 main stages that students go through when they are running any assignments on Kritik: create, evaluate, and feedback. Create is basically, as the name suggests, where the students have a chance to take a look at the activity details that the instructor has outlined, the objectives, instructions, and the rubric with the different parameters and the levels, which pops out here as well, and go ahead and respond to the assignment, either by typing out a response or attaching files that could vary from PDFs to PowerPoints, Word documents to audio and video files. We do have deadlines defined in here by the instructor as well, which basically means any students that have not completed the assignment a couple of days before the deadlines do have the chance to get an email reminder so that they can complete on time. There is a quick poll that is running right now on Zoom, so please take a quick second to respond to that as well. The second phase is the evaluate phase. This is again where the students now have a chance to provide feedback and their thoughts on some of the work that their peers did for the same assignment. The objectives, instructions for them to use as a reference point, and simply they go through their peers' work and provide quantitative and qualitative feedback. Quantitatively, the same parameters from the rubric with the breakdown there, they mark down the number of stars that they think their peers' assessment deserves, and that is also supported by qualitative comments, which has a minimum number of characters required, where the students write out, things that could have been improved, things that were incorrect, different ideas to approach the same problem, etc. And of course, they can attach files in there as well. This entire practice is completely anonymous, so the student, in this case, Jane, has no idea who she's evaluating. And that helps overcome some of the biases towards good friends or, worries about providing lower scores. It's really encouraging more honest, candid feedback to come through. And the number of peers that a student would evaluate is defined by you as the instructor between the range of 3 to 20 peer evaluations. The final phase is the feedback phase. This is basically where the students have a chance to take a look at the scores that they've received from their peers, quantitatively and qualitatively, and also provide feedback to the peers who scored these assignments, whether it was a motivational critique, was it discouraging, was it effective or good, and also provide comments. So making this a 360-degree feedback loop. And again, over here, Jane has no idea who evaluated her. So it's completely anonymous. We do have the option for students that are not completely convinced by the scores that they received to use the little dispute score feature and raise a point to the instructor for them to take a second look before finalizing grades. And that's a quick look at what Kritik does for classes. If you'd like to learn more, of course, we will be sharing a link in the Zoom chat to book a one-on-one demo to learn more about how it could apply to your classes. But for now, I'm going to hand it over to Eli to take over with the rest of the session and conversation with Dr. Freberg.
Perfect. Thanks, Rohan. Much appreciated. And thanks, everyone, for patiently waiting during the demo. I think it just helps to set that for context for us to understand how it works so that you can take more away from this conversation with Karen. So I will share my screen now, and we'll briefly go through. Karen, if you want to talk a little bit about how you used it, and then we can have a Q&A session with everyone involved.
Okay, that sounds good to me. Yeah, so I'm really, again, so grateful, Eli and Justin and Rohan, for the opportunity to be able to share kind of the takeaways and experiences that I've had using Kritik. And to give you guys a little bit of a background, I have been using Kritik now for a little over a year. And I do have to thank someone who was actually on the call. The original Dr. Freberg, my mom, actually was the first Kritik user and thought that this would be a great resource for my classes at the University of Louisville. And so I actually decided to use Kritik in my Introduction to Strategic Communication class. And so we have a concentration in the Department of Communication at the University of Louisville in strategic communication. And so this is like the first class that students get into. It is kind of a mass lecture course. And the reason why I felt Kritik was very much a game changer for me, for my class, was as I was seeing students coming into my social media class, they would be able to define certain concepts, but then if I asked them to demonstrate those concepts into projects or other activities, they really didn't have that experience. And I also wanted to give them too an opportunity to write content and get feedback and be, as Rohan mentioned, like giving the chance for them to be an effective evaluator. So I completely actually redesigned this intro class to kind of address and integrate Kritik into the course. And so beforehand, I had a midterm and I had a final exam because it was a mass lecture course. But I reconstructed this course where the final project replaced the final exam. And so groups, of students came together to really come up with a strategic campaign proposal for a local business and a local nonprofit. But what I did was I used Kritik throughout the semester, and I made assignments basically testing the students on concepts that I kept seeing over and over again as being a challenging aspect of strategic communications throughout kind of the class. So you can see here, actually figuring, having a question looking at the introduction to strategic communication. I had a lot of students that really didn't know how to define what advertising was versus PR or marketing, what the differences are. So I felt it was good to have a actual question that addressed that. But then the SWOT analysis, giving the students a chance to actually practice doing a SWOT analysis, and then actually writing out goals and objectives. Students sometimes kind of, mix up between the two. And then integrating the PESO model. So as you can see here, I utilized Kritik for 5 different assignments, and you can kind of, change those assignments depending on the overall structure or term, length that you have. So what I wanted to do is kind of focus on 5 assignments, not overwhelm the students too much. They were due every couple of weeks, but it all led up to basically incorporating this feedback into a final project. And so I have to say, like I've done this for, again, like the last couple of semesters, and I have seen not only an improvement in my students' writing, but like in their final projects, I was able to see, okay, they can write an objective statement. They get the benefit of getting that feedback, not only from me, but also from their peers, really kind of showed like a better level of understanding to kind of give them the confidence that they can not only know the concepts, but they can actually apply them into the classwork.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think something that we try to focus on at Kritik is we want it to solve problems in the class. So identifying an area of weakness in terms of pedagogy or the way the course is designed. And then, as Karen mentioned, integrating the platform to make sure it's meaningful for the students. And so I quickly grabbed just a few screenshots, and we'll be sharing the slides deck afterwards with those who are interested. But just in terms of designing it, you would come up with the objective, the instructions. I love how Karen linked several different things. I think just making it easier for the students to access and use, and then obviously creating a rubric. So something simple, something easy for the students to use and understand and evaluate their peers. More importantly, we're looking for the feedback that they provide. So as Karen discussed, she kind of broke it down into 5 different activities in the class. And again, this is just to give you an idea of how flexible the platform is and how many different ways you can use it. And so that being said, I did have some questions of my own, and there are some questions in the audience that I think would be important for us to cover. So Karen, something that I've heard in my conversations with professors who are using the platform, a few of them don't know where to get started. Should they kind of throw out what exists in their class? Should they just start building stuff in Kritik and then kind of just go with the flow? How did you find that initial setup for the first time you used it? Was it difficult? And what kind of lessons can you share with the people here?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. I felt that when I was utilizing Kritik, I kind of knew right away which assignments I would definitely use. Like, as I mentioned, like the goals and objectives section that I had was absolutely paramount to have, because I felt that was like one of the biggest things that I had to discuss in and out of the classroom with students, what the difference is between writing a goal statement versus an objective statement. So I knew that there would be absolutely some key assignments that I would definitely add here, as part of Kritik. But then I kind of looked at, okay, what would be some of the more beneficial areas that would be helpful and kind of leading up to the final project. And I know there are some classes that don't have that final project. They could have an exam, or they could have some other kind of, end projects in mind. But I felt, and the way that I kind of, talked to the students about this, I said, look, this is an opportunity for you to kind of test your understanding to make sure, one, you not only know the concepts, but you have the ability to actually practice what you preach. And I'm able to tie that back to what, like, the need to know that when they're doing internships or jobs and everything, like, so it's something that it's not going to be like necessarily busy work for them. But so I kind of explained that a little bit in the introduction to Kritik as a worthwhile tool. And the students, again, as you said, with the calibration, like the first assignment, students were like, okay, I'm going to be evaluating myself. And so they were, of course, concerned about, who would be evaluating them. And I was like, that's completely anonymous, and then you can like basically say, hey, I didn't think that my grade was, correctly graded, and I'm able to kind of go back and say, okay, yes, like you're either right or saying, no, I think that, this is the grade that I would assign for you. And so it's a very seamless process. So the biggest thing that I had to kind of do is making sure that I gave enough time in between the create, evaluate, and feedback, because I told my students, I don't want to have like 3 of these assignments due all at once at the same time as the midterm. I don't want to cause, extra stress, for my students. So I would say that kind of the planning, like I tried to structure the assignments based on making sure that they were due after we talked about that concept at least a few classes beforehand. So the first assignment that I had, the introduction to strategic communication, we had already been in class for about a week and a half. And so I teach a Tuesday, Thursday course load. And so basically, I told the students, okay, we're hitting the ground running, but I'm not giving you this assignment like the first day of class. I'm going to give it to you not the first Thursday, but the second Thursday. So they at least have kind of a week, to kind of gather their thoughts, because we basically hit the ground running with our content. And so, but it was pretty good in terms of structuring. And so I was able to give students reminders. And then, as you said, if they miss an assignment, there is that grace period too. Like that students have, like if they miss that assignment, I always give like 2 hours, kind of a buffer period time. And I always have the assignments due at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's kind of been a universal deadline, but I always make sure that those are due on a Thursday versus like a Tuesday, because we do run into like fall break, Labor Day, and a few other holidays. So it's a kind of about the timing and structure. Like that was actually, it wasn't the assignment that actually it took me a long time to create, because it was very seamless in terms of setting up the rubric, the points, the assignment, but it was actually kind of the scheduling, making sure that it all kind of made sense with the content that I was covering and what the students need to do.
Definitely. When I work with instructors, scheduling is almost always the first thing I talk about once we just show the platform around. So especially there are some instructors who use it to completely reinvent their discussion boards. So for more formative, smaller opportunities for students to engage with each other and practice their writing skills. If you're doing it on a frequent basis, like every week or every 2 weeks, it's really important that you find, similar deadlines from week to week so that the students build in routine when coming to Kritik.
Exactly.
That being said, we obviously remind them with email. We recently started reminding them over text, because we realized students like to use their phones more than they'd like to use their email. So trying to help them out wherever we can. And so, Karen, a question that came in privately to me on this chat, someone had asked, they're curious whether all of the 5 assignments were group assignments or were they individual for the ones that you ran in Kritik?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So they're actually, like, these were all individual assignments that I wanted the students to kind of own, because I don't know if everyone on the webinar and workshop has the same feelings, from their students, but some students love group assignments and then others just don't. And so I feel that there are some students who really wanted kind of that individual kind of opportunity to kind of say, okay, I want to show what I know. I don't want to rely on my group members and stuff. So I feel that that is something that I really wanted to make sure that I did, because I wanted to actually see for myself what each individual student knows. So if there were things that I needed to clarify and work with them individually on, that they felt comfortable with that. And so there were a couple of times that some of the students had maybe a lower grade than they expected to get on their assignment, then I was able to say, hey, let's jump on a Zoom call, let's go over this so then you don't kind of make this mistake, not only for internships or future jobs, but also kind of leading up to the group project. And I also felt too was another checkpoint for me, like with that final group project. And I did peer evaluations, of course, for the group project, but it was another indicator for me that I could say, okay, who knows their stuff, and who, if there was a student in a group that kind of wanted to get a free pass in the group project, they didn't really know that, or contribute to kind of same, level, I was able to kind of see, okay, these students were kind of, the ones that did the work, and this student, may have not necessarily done the work. So.
No, definitely. And, we can't be a feedback platform without getting feedback. So we care a lot about how instructors use it. We're constantly iterating. And some of the features, I'm not sure if Karen's had a chance to check out, that we've released in the last couple of weeks, address some of those when it comes to late submissions, when it comes to spreading around the wealth of information, or stronger evaluators versus weaker ones, as well as even now we have an intra-group evaluation feature. So I know many of you who have group projects ask the students to rate their peers, and it tends to be a difficult experience. Students either don't take it seriously and kind of say everyone did great, and it's hard for you to kind of glean insights into who's doing what. We have a really cool process for that now as well, based on the demand from what instructors wanted to see. So a couple of other questions that are coming into the chat, which is great. So the first one, Abby asks, Dr. Freberg, did you then regrade after the peer assessments, and how often were you changing grades? Additionally, did you grade the peer feedback for substance?
Yeah, that is a great question, Abby. And so one of the things that I would recommend if you are using Kritik in the classroom is really set, like I basically follow the philosophy, inspect what you expect. And so that first initial assignment is really crucial. So you need to give students clear instructions, not only for the assignment, but how to evaluate proactively. And so Kritik does have kind of those best practices laid out very seamlessly within the platform, which is awesome. But that is a chance too, where you're able to kind of test the students out to kind of see who has the great content, feedback, and then who has the great feedback. And so what I've tried to do in my classes is kind of bring two shining examples, like one strong piece of content, but then also one great evaluation to kind of show the students, saying this is really great. This is the type of thing that I'm looking for, in future projects. And so when I'm basically assigning points, like the first assignment is not as it's I think 10 points, I think, that I assign the first grade, where there's others are 15 or 20 points later on in the semester. But I wanted to give the students kind of a chance to kind of dip their toes and kind of see what's going on. But in terms of the 2 semesters that I've used Kritik, I've only had to go back and, revise one grade that a student said, hey, I don't think I was graded correctly. And so I do have a chance to kind of go back to the submissions and kind of see if, as Eli said, if there were some people that said, oh, this was great, and that's all they wrote. I'm like, I don't know about that. So there was only one time that, a student, I actually went back and I'm like, okay, this needs to be adjusted. And so there's another question about kind of evaluators, too, in those gradings. And so I try to randomize it as much as possible. So not the same people are grading each other versus others. And so my classes run between 20, 30, 40 plus students. So I try to kind of mix everything up.
Yeah, for sure. And on that note as well, Rohan briefly covered it at the beginning. And if you're interested, you can book some time to talk with one of our professor consultants on how the platform works. But there are different grades for different elements of the peer review process. So not only do you get a grade for how other people evaluate you based on a rubric, so the quality of your work, you also receive your grade for your ability as an evaluator. So when you're grading someone, how are you using the rubric? Are you responsibly using it? And that's based on our algorithm. And then also the quality of your written evaluation, so what we call the written evaluation score. Typically, when students just write great job, you did great, the student they're evaluating is responding to that feedback and rating it as motivational and critical. And so it's really interesting for students when they put a lot of effort into other evaluations, and when they get that back, there is that level of accountability for them to, they want to see and receive and rate high quality feedback. So of course, as the instructor, you have complete view and insight into this, and you can override it as necessary. But it is quite interesting to see how the students evolve. And something that Karen mentioned that we actually built into the platform recently because of similar feedback is the ability to spotlight. Students have been doing assignments since what, grade 1, grade 2? They know how to follow instructions and follow a rubric. Evaluations are a pretty new concept to them. So when professors see really strong comments, they can spotlight them, share them with the class. It's all anonymous. And the students have really appreciated that because they get an example. Oh, okay, this is what Dr. Freberg wants to see in evaluations. This is what someone else in my class did. I'm going to kind of follow that structure. And that tends to work out really well. So a few other questions coming in. I know Rohan's doing his best to answer them in the chat as well, but more so process related, Karen. Another sort of point where professors struggle when I meet with them and help them use the platform is rubrics, especially no one likes rubrics, but if you're having students evaluate each other, you need to build them out. So what was your experience with creating rubrics within the Kritik system, given that you had to kind of revamp the course and create these assignments from scratch?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I'm one of those professors when it comes to designing rubrics. I'm like, oh my gosh, because that actually for me has always been the most time consuming part of kind of designing a class and stuff. But the thing that I was very grateful for is that you actually had the rubrics built in, but then you have preset rubrics that you're able to basically pick and choose, which is great. But then if you wanted to add your own content, so I had some stuff related to creativity, strategy, and then for those of us who are very particular about references, like I want to make sure that the students know how to cite their resources. And make sure that their, citations are correct. That's something that I tell my students ahead of time. I'm a pretty easy person, but there's some stickling, there's some, pet peeves that I have. And that's one of them is just making sure that you're using one style consistently. So I was able to basically personalize my rubric that way. So the templates, that are already set forth are great because they kind of universally, incorporate all of the, great pedagogy, principles that we have as instructors, but then you're able to tailor that to kind of, really personalize your rubric accordingly. And so what I've done too is I've been able to save my rubric. So if I want to kind of like, if there's some similar assignments, like I had a couple, assignments that were very aligned and similar in terms of what I was looking for. So I was able to basically, kind of continue, using those rubrics before. So the time that it would take me to design a rubric was like absolutely minimized in a very seamless fashion, with the rubrics that have been, and the template that has already been incorporated in Kritik.
Definitely. And yeah, like we're constantly, now that we have so many instructors using the platform, what we learned was that professors like to share materials. I think that's the foundation as well for the social media professors group as well. People want to share what's working for them and learn from one another. And so sharing rubrics is something that happens very frequently. So if you are interested in, seeing some other examples, a lot of profs often would be happy to share them. But a few questions came in on integration with LMS. So yeah, we do offer at least gradebook integration for the majority of the LMS systems. Karen Freberg and the original Dr. Laura Freberg had used Kritik before integrations existed. And so they have experience with how that works. So maybe you could talk to us a little bit, Karen, about, what was the student reaction when having to kind of go to a different site, being Kritik, to have to answer the questions? Did you get any questions about that? Did they use the live chat? Like, how did they find the overall access of Kritik, and did it cause any strains with your class, given that it wasn't fully integrated into the LMS?
Right. Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I mean, just with this introduction course, I've always had some sort of additional component that was always outside of, we have Blackboard at the University of Louisville. So when I first started, I used iClicker, and then I basically incorporated, I did iClicker for about a year or two. And then I switched over to Top Hat. And so all of those were both, really, like, again, separate, entities that I had to kind of export the, grades and, participation points and everything and then basically import it back in Blackboard. So for the students, I think the biggest thing that they were kind of looking at is making sure that they were registered on time, but like it was all seamless. And so what I was able to do was work with the bookstore, and they basically said, hey, just go to Kritik, have the students pay for it, and that's good. And I know that there was a question from Beth, kind of looking at the cost of basically purchasing Kritik, and the students really didn't have any issues paying for it. But, one of the things that I talked about, kind of the reason why I'm using Kritik is kind of looking, and I always share in my classes current articles and reports on what employers are looking for. And so I highlight saying, okay, some of the things that you all are going to be learning in this class, and especially with Kritik, these are some of the skills, evaluations, critical thinking, strategic thinking, creativity. You're able to apply these, to, your overall understanding. And so I try to make sure that I tell the students what you're investing in with this tool is going to pay off. It's not just something that it's like, okay, here's a $500 book, that you may use for a semester, but this will help you, teach students. The students will be able to learn some of these key soft skills, that will be able to be beneficial for the long term.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think a really great point you mentioned there, Karen, is stressing the importance of what they'll learn from this. Students, unfortunately, as you mentioned, Karen, have been subject to paying a lot of money for textbooks they don't use. And so sometimes when, they feel that they need to buy anything, regardless of even if it's $20 or something like that, that idea of paying for something, they're preconditioned to not see value in it, given their experience with textbooks that they didn't get to use or wasn't integrated correctly. I've seen some instructors now who do a really great job of stressing the importance and the transferable skills you get from Kritik right before they use the platform. And there's one professor actually who created this, he loves making like online videos, and he created this really interactive video that he shares with the students and basically explains the value of it, and why it'll help them, and the students respond well to that. So I know there's a question about setup time and prep. That's one of the many materials I share with instructors to get them set up. Typically our process after you meet with one of our professor consultants like Rohan, and you decide, you want to use the platform or explore it deeper, you can set up a meeting with me and my team, and we basically ask questions about your course, show you some examples of how you can use it, and figure out the best fit based on pedagogical principles that work. So as Karen mentioned, she kind of revamped the course to make Kritik work after seeing the value in it, but it's more than, you just want to solve problems that exist in the class, whether it's taking one small assignment and kind of scaffolding and breaking it up, or taking small formative writing assignments. I've seen it be used in so many different ways, and we'd be happy to share some of those with you as well. But I guess my favorite question to ask in these sessions, Karen, being someone who it was your first time using it, you thought about using it, what kind of lessons would you give based on your experience having used it to instructors to get the most value out of the platform?
Yeah, I would say that the lessons that I've learned with Kritik is that, there's so many opportunities to really, I think, it's a really untapped tool that has a lot of possibilities and versatility, as you mentioned, Eli. You've seen demonstrations that have been used in grad school and, of course, intro level courses, but then also specific courses like that I have at the for Introduction to Strategic Communications. I feel that depending on like what you want to accomplish, for your course, there's so many possibilities. And so I feel that as I was kind of delving in deep in the platform, I had to kind of catch myself saying, Karen, it is not, going to be helpful for your students if you assign 10 projects. I know you want to, but your students don't want to do that because you have other things that you're doing to test their knowledge and concepts and understanding about the coursework that you're doing. And so I feel that there's the lesson that I have is, start small. I would say that I've been able to kind of tweak a little bit of the different assignments. And so if you're deciding like for the fall, if you're like, hey, this is great, I definitely want to choose in the spring, you can make a copy of your course, for the following semester. So you don't have to necessarily reinvent the wheel, but you can update and edit as you go. And so that's kind of what I did. The first semester, I'm like, I'm going to do a baby step through this. I'm going to see how this works. And then like last spring, I was like, okay, both feet in, full, board. And I always did, I think the important thing too is do in-class check-ins, whether you're teaching online or doing class in person. Really kind of check with your students and kind of say, hey, how are you guys feeling? You can even do kind of like an anonymous poll in class, like, what are your thoughts about Kritik, and how has this been helpful? And giving, the students the opportunity to say, hey, I've really liked it, or, kind of a self-reflection opportunity for them to kind of see, okay, have they seen the benefit of that? And that's one thing that I do too at the end of this semester with my course evaluations is I ask the students, like, how was this beneficial? Like, what are some things that we can do to improve? Are there certain, one of my questions that I asked before both semesters is like, is there an assignment that you would have liked to have done on Kritik that we didn't do? And so some of the students have said that they really wanted to do like, for example, a crisis communication, assignment. They really were kind of interested in that. And we didn't have, when we were covering crisis communication, like it was near the end of the semester. And so the students said that they really wanted to have that. So that is something that I think that I will be adding on for the fall semester when I'm using Kritik in my class again.
Awesome. Yeah, and something I've noticed now working with professors like Karen and Laura and some other ones as well, once you use it once and get your feet wet, you realize how to iterate and tweak it and make things work. So a few other questions that are coming in. So Patrice asked a great question here. Is there a break even in terms of number of peer assignments? So there's cost value for the students. So we did a lot of research on a lot of different things within Kritik, and we found that the number of assessments for students to feel value with the platform at a minimum is 4. So as long as you have 4 assignments that are thought out carefully, the students do feel value in it. And that's when we surveyed them and asked them how they felt about it, what we can do to improve, similar to what Laura mentioned in terms of what they can get. And so Karen, in terms of feedback that you got from the students, you mentioned you have these evaluations. What did you find informally, or maybe even that they said in their teacher evaluations about the platform that you can share with us?
Yeah, I think, I really didn't know like how the students would react to kind of, doing this, additional feedback, like getting graded and kind of being kind of the evaluator itself. I kind of felt, for me, like I always love using new tools, so when I used this last fall, I thought, okay, I'm going to, see how this goes and see like what the students reacted. And so I actually was very pleased with how responsive and encouraging and positive the students were based on the feedback, because a lot of the students in my class said that they felt more confident being able to talk and demonstrate these concepts. Because I, like in my introduction to strategic communication class, so I have, as some students who are sophomores, so they have time to kind of go in our progression for our strategic communication sequence. But then sometimes I have seniors who are on the job market, who are applying for jobs or maybe grad school, and they have said this has been beneficial for them to be able to integrate some of these concepts and tools, like basically exercises to for the job interviews and stuff. So it's been beneficial. And what I've seen as another positive is I have a lot of students who continue on with me to take my social media classes at the University of Louisville. So the introduction course that I am using Kritik for is kind of the prereq for my social media classes. And I've seen a huge difference in the writing and strategic thinking and concepts based on what I've been seeing from utilizing Kritik in my classes. So I've been sharing that with my other colleagues who teach our StratCom courses and say, hey, this would be great, kind of universally kind of adopt, for our concentration. And so it's been, very beneficial. And so some of the students have appreciated the extra feedback, but also I feel too that one thing that I would, share with the educators too is there's sometimes students want to hear from us, they want to get our feedback, but it's something to get feedback from their classmates that they're like, oh, okay, my classmate thinks also that I need to work on some of these things. So it's just kind of a different way of, learning and growing. And so if you're able to kind of create this dynamic learning environment for everyone, they feel supported. They feel like, okay, we're all helping each other out, so all of the reviews, even too, if students, didn't get some of the concepts, the feedback has always been encouraging and saying, hey, have you thought about this? This is something that I would work on for the future. So the students were helping the students. And so for me, seeing that and getting that response in the course evaluations was really beneficial, because I tell the students, look, you're going to have to evaluate your team members if you're working for an agency or brand or company. This is what you're going to have to do. This is a key skill. And I've also shared with them that this is something that they could add and explain to the job interviews, like, hey, I've had the opportunity to evaluate, and these are skills that I've been able to look at too. So
yeah, most definitely. I think that's the biggest disservice that unfortunately occurs in undergraduate education, especially, is that students don't get enough formal opportunity to really practice and review and react to feedback. There's so many opportunities for students to rate someone else, but to not get the feedback on how they did as an evaluator is critical. And of course, as you mentioned, Karen, it's huge. It's essential to succeeding as you get into your career, move into a managerial position. Without being able to provide feedback, or more importantly, know how to receive and use feedback, I think is an even bigger skill. But I do want to be mindful of everyone's time, and I do want to thank everyone for joining, especially Dr. Karen Freberg for all of her insights and time. In terms of moving forward from this, if you are interested in learning a little bit more, or maybe seeing some more specific examples of how Kritik could work in a course similar to yours, there's been a few links that have been posted by Justin in the live chat, so feel free to click them there, or just visit our website and click on Educators Get Started. We'd be happy to meet with you, talk to you about how this platform could work with you, and most importantly, just show you some examples of how it works. We have started to work with some instructors on publishing research related to Kritik. So if you are interested in using the platform and adding to research, spoiler alert, peer review research in specific disciplines is an emerging field. So a lot of instructors using our platform are finding that there's not enough research out there on the effectiveness of it. So feel free again to get in contact with us or to contact our co-founder, Karine,